seminar for Drink Atlantic. It's crazy that we've done this for an entire month. It's been a tremendous success, and due part to all of these lovely people that have been willing to share their valuable, very valuable time and energy to put together as much information that they can provide. It's been overwhelming for us at Drink Atlantic to see the support that we've gotten from the community here in Halifax, but also just worldwide. We've had an incredible turnout internationally, and it goes to show how many people are looking to learn. And that's a testament to organizations like WSET, who has been one of our banner sponsors this year. And in Canada, for those of you that are tuning in from outside of Canada, they sponsored, along with Corby's, 1,500 bartenders to get their level 1 in spirits education. And I know that I did it, and I hope you all are studying hard for the exam coming up. If you haven't written it already and are getting ready for level 2, I'm definitely going to be signing up for that. The amount of information and time that these people put together is incredible. So thank you so much. For those of you that don't know about Drink Atlantic, this is our 3rd year. We're a small cocktail festival based in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and we're celebrating the hospitality industry here and the spirits industry in Atlantic Canada. We're trying to bring industry experts here to help educate our industry, but also celebrate our hospitality industry here and showcase all of the great things that are happening. So next year, we hope to see you all in person in Halifax in a balmy June, and you'll get to see all the great things, eat all the best fish in the world, and drink some of the best cocktails in the world too. So another big shout out to the NSLC, which is our public liquor board that controls everything here for liquor, and they've been awesome. You can find out more about Drink Atlantic on our YouTube page, on our Facebook page, and thanks so much to Evan McNeil, who's one of our co-hosts, for putting all that together. Today's seminar will be recorded, so you can check back if there's going to be a lot of information. So if you want to do some studying and check back, this is going to be a great resource for everybody. So I just wanted to put a big shout out there to the CPBA as well for helping get the word out there. John Smolensky, thanks so much. This is our 8th seminar, and you can find, again, those recorded seminars on our YouTube page. And this week we'll have them all up, and some of them will live forever, others won't. So make sure that you're up there checking it out so that you can be well informed. There's some great resources. We've had some incredible speakers, and I feel very, very grateful to be a part of this festival. So thank you very much. And with no further ado, we're going to get right into it, because I know that there's a ton of great info, and I'm super excited for this panel. There's some very charismatic and educated people here. This one is brought to you by WSET. And our moderator for the day is Nick King, and he's notorious for back injuries, from what I hear.
Yeah, I still have that back injury. It's still plaguing me. L4, L5, if anyone's interested. Yeah. So welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining from a sunny and actually quite pleasant London. So happy days. So today we're talking about stills, and we're going to be featuring 2 distilleries, Hiram Walker, which is clearly a very big facility, and they produce a lot of different things, and also Worthy Park, which is operating on a much smaller scale. It's actually a very young distillery, although distilling on their site has an enormously long pedigree. This modern distillery is actually relatively new. And they only have 1 still. So there is quite a range here of kind of different kinds of approaches to distillation. So that's really what we're going to do. So what we're going to head off with is that, first of all, I'm going to introduce some people. So first of all, I'm Nick. I work in London. I work for the Wine and Spirit Education Trust. And what I do is I develop spirits education and the qualifications that the WSET offers. And our latest offering, the level 3, has been out now since nearly a year that's been out for, and that's been going very well. And a big thank you to Corby for their support with the level 1s that we've been able to offer with them during the shutdown period, which has been a very positive thing from everyone's point of view, I hope. So that's me. Now from Hiram Walker we have Don Livermore, who is the master blender there. And from Worthy Park, we have Zan Kong, who is very keen to inform us that he is in a Starbucks near the beach in Jamaica. So yeah.
On the beach, Nick, on the beach.
Oh, on the beach. Oh, sorry, on the beach.
Just to clarify, just to clarify.
Okay, just to clarify, on the beach. Okay. So what we're going to do, just to kind of give us a structure for this hour, I'm going to ask Don and Zan just to kind of introduce themselves and introduce the facilities that they work in. Then I'm going to come have a little bit of an overview of some of the aspects of distillation, and then both Don and Zan will talk about their own production choices and the stills that they're using in a little bit more detail. And then there'll be plenty of opportunities for some sort of questions and answers as we go through. Now, you can type questions into the chat feature. He says, assuming that does exist, I'm sure it does. I have a colleague operating in the background who will be able to sort of help with, if it's just maybe a slightly more generic question, but if there are really interesting questions that are quite really kind of pertinent to the discussion, then we can sort of feed those through. Okay, so that's the structure we're kind of working with. So yeah, there we go. Now, what we're going to do now is I'm going to pass over to Don and ask Don for just to talk about Hiram Walker, just a very short introduction to Hiram Walker and the kind of the core brands and what you produce.
Thanks, Nick, and thank you for inviting me to be a speaker today on a bright, sunny day here in Windsor, Ontario. I think we're supposed to get to 93 degrees here. It's going to be pretty toasty in terms of temperature, but it's quite an iconic day, as yesterday was Hiram Walker's 204th birthday. He was born on Independence Day in America, and he was an American citizen. He was from the Boston area, and at the age of 22, he moved to the city of Detroit to run and operate a grocery store. That's what his primary business was at that time. And if you think about the 1840s, 1850s, he would be buying commodities in from the surrounding area, and he would sell a number of things out of his grocery store. And one of them happened to be moonshine. And he was into the art of distillation and rectification, and I don't know what possessed Hiram Walker to do it, but he would take that moonshine that was produced by these local farmers and he'd run it through charcoal. I think he ran a lot of things through charcoal back in that era just to strip out a lot of the undesirable flavors, and he became quite good and known and had a great reputation in the city of Detroit for this. And he would sell moonshine for 5 cents a gallon, a hell of a deal in the 1840s out of his grocery store. But he was an entrepreneur. I mean, he was a business guy. He wanted to build a distillery. So he needed to find some cheap property, low taxes. They did not want to look at the prohibition. So he bought the property in Windsor, Ontario. That's where I'm located, which is south of the US border. We're the only Canadian city that is south of the US border. If you look at your iPhone, you can see how Windsor tucks underneath Detroit. He bought 469 acres for 1,500 pounds at that time. And he commuted by boat every day to run and operate his distillery. And we've been operating there since 1858. And he was certainly revolutionary. He certainly is very part of the Canadian culture. He was one of Canada's largest taxpayers going through the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s. He was very involved in the community life. The city, our section of the city is actually called Walkerville. It's named after him. He grew and developed technologies, and he was very much part of Canadian life. And oftentimes I'll say in whiskey tastings, Hiram Walker or in the distilleries in Canada, that Canada was built on the backs of the whiskey producers, because Canadians, we weren't taxed for 50 years before we were a country, and they were all made the income from the whiskey producers. Now, through prohibition and through acquisitions, we eventually got owned by Allied Domecq through the 1980s and 1990s, and through 2005, Pernod Ricard now owns the facility. With the facility, it is one of the largest, if not the largest distillery in North America in terms of beverage. Most people don't realize that Canada has such a large distillery, but at the same time, it's a great distillery to work at because we do large and small within the same walls. And I've had many writers and whiskey connoisseurs walking through our facility say, wow, it's unbelievable, the flexibility. We've never seen a distillery with this type of technology inside of the distillery. So today, our capacity is producing 55 million absolute liters of alcohol. When you size a distillery, that's how we produce it. We're probably operating around the 48, 49 million, so close to capacity. And largely our production revolves around whiskey and Canadian whiskey. But we're not limited to that as well. We do make some rums, we do make gins, we do make vodkas, all within the same walls. We do, and I'm going to talk about it in a bit, we do have column distillation and rectification stills. We got 4 different styles of pot stills. So we're kind of a full service type of distillery that can kind of make it all. And we do that. And it is a great facility to work for. It's a great company. And I'll leave it at that, Nick, as to the background of where we are today.
No, that's super. And I'm really intrigued to sort of know more about this facility, because I mean, it is just so enormous. I was looking at some of the figures earlier on today. Really is a very significant volume producer, and the flexibility that you can generate within different still types. I mean, that's genuinely very fascinating. So we're going from this to a one still operation, which is Worthy Park. So Zan,
hello everybody.
Tell us a little bit about Worthy Park.
Yeah, so Worthy Park, you know, I think Nick alluded to it. You know, we're a pretty modern distillery in a sense, where the distillery we are working from now was built in 2004, and our first rum was off of that still in 2005. But our estate actually goes back to 1670. So this year is our 350th anniversary as Worthy Park Estate. Started as 840 acres, and now we're just under 10,000. And we've done sugar. We're a sugar producer still, and we started sugar production in 1720. So we've done sugar production every year for the last 300 years. And our first record of rum production at the estate was in 1741. And we made rum straight through until about 1960, when we took a break, shut down our stills, and reopened in 2004. So yeah, we've been here since essentially the beginning of, you know, the British domination, colonization of Jamaica. And, you know, through, you know, the colonial times, just like most of the other islands, we were making rum in bulk. So we were making rum as a commodity, and similar to the sugar, you know, we were making it here and selling it to brokers and traders. And, you know, the value and all, you know, the rum brands itself were essentially done overseas. So then you fast forward to now times, or modern times, whichever you want to refer to it. And, you know, Gordon Clark, who is my boss, our CEO, his great grandfather bought Worthy Park in 1918. So his family's owned and operated Worthy Park for 102 years. And, you know, prior to that, you know, there was only, his family is a fourth family to own Worthy Park. And we had, you know, the Price family, who was the original founder, his family and lineage owned it pretty much until right after emancipation and slavery was abolished in Jamaica, because there was a downturn in the sugar and rum economy for the island, and a lot of the estates kind of went belly up, for a lack of better phrase. And, you know, there was ownership change a couple of times until it landed in the Price family, and like I said, 1918. So that's kind of, you know, the long of the history. But you know, now we are a pot still rum producer. We only have one still, so much smaller than what Don does up there in Windsor. But we're very specialized in that we're only making rum, and you know, we are one of the only producers in Jamaica that's solely using a pot still. Tongue twister there, but yeah,
we get you.
Yeah, and I'm super stoked to share with you a little bit more as we get into it. And yeah, I'm gonna tell Nick now, warn Nick, he's done a presentation with me before. It's very hard to take the microphone away from me, and I know you've given me a strict timeline, but you're gonna probably have to just mute the shit out of me whenever you need to. And at that, I will stop for now. Yeah.
Okay, very good. I'll make a sign. Stop.
Yes,
there we go.
Yes, yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so we're looking at two very different distilleries here, and two distilleries that are both able to produce incredibly good juice. And what I'm kind of tasked with doing now is just kind of not so much giving an overview of distillation, that would just take forever, but just to kind of focus in on a few points. Now, the first of all is that distillation is is about two things. It's concentration is obvious, but it's about selection as well. It's the two things that have to happen. There is a thing which is called ice distillation, whereby you freeze, skim the water off, and then everything is concentrated. There are certain ridiculous brewers that use that technique. But heat distillation gives you the ability to separate. And that's the crux of it. So even with the simplest of stills, so quite often when people teach and distillation early on, they'll kind of, here's this kind of like very basic alembic, and here's a pot, and the tube goes round to a kind of a coiled condenser. Even with something like that, it's a tool. So how well you use that tool is going to affect the style of the spirit that you can make. So how well you control the temperature, and how well you manage the reflux within that still, where you make your cut points. Even in a very, very simple still, there are choices which will affect whether something's going to come out really well or something's going to come out really badly. So one of the kind of the things I do like to also put to the sword is the notion that somehow pots are innately superior in some way to columns, which is fairly nonsensical, because you can produce great spirit in both, quite frankly, and you can produce ghastly spirit in both. It's to do as much with how you operate and how they're being designed, and what's your intention with those. So if you were to give me Zan's still, or even Don's stills, but I gave me Don stills, I'd probably panic and like there are too many buttons here, and I'd run away. But what I could do with them is utterly inferior, because I don't have the sense of of the feel for these things. It's like any tool, it's about how well it is used. Now, clearly, a column still can do one thing a pot still can't do, which is go up to very high levels of rectification. So if you want to make neutral spirit, then you have to use a column. So there is a lot of discussion about, oh, look, it's a vodka made in a pot still. Well, a pot still may have been used at some juncture along the way, but if you want to get up to 95, 96%, depending on which jurisdiction you're in, a column is fundamentally required. And then there's all sorts of other little bells and whistles that you can put in. There's hydroselection, there's demethylizing. Now, it's all about your intention. It's all about what you're intending to create, and how well you do, and how well you execute, and how well you plan that. So that's the key, really. It's understanding what this technology can do. And ultimately, this is all technology. This is all kind of chemical engineering of some description or other. This is not a natural process, just distilling. It's a pretty violent intervention into a liquid. You're kind of breaking it down into pretty kind of molecular level and then reassembling it. So it is a very violent sort of interjection. So it's about how the human is managing that, and what your intention is, and have you got the right bit of equipment that's going to get you to that end result. So we've got huge contrasts here. So we've got the pot and the retort, which is a very unique system. You don't really see the pot retort system much outside of the Caribbean. Although if you encounter thumpers, and Don, I don't know if you have a kind of a thumper sort of what's the other one, doubler sort of system in one of your stills. No, okay. So a thumper is largely operating. You will see them if you go to Jack Daniel's has a thumper. There are other distilleries in Kentucky, Tennessee that do. They're working on very broadly similar principles, but the pot retort is very much a Caribbean thing. And people quite often think, because you can get, particularly in Jamaica where Zan is, you can get all these very funky styles of rum. And somehow the association could be made with that something to do with the still. It's not really, because it's not really the still itself. It's a device which allows you to concentrate and select, but a lot of the funk comes from other directions. It allows you to create the kind of style that you particularly want. So they're the kind of simple kind of things that points that I want to kind of get across initially. We can't really kind of do lots of detail, and it's really not for me to do that, because we're going to have these two guys talking about exactly what it is that they're doing. So what I'm going to do is who have I got on my list to go next? Well, it makes sense we start with Don. We'll go back to Don. So we're going to ask Don just to talk a little bit more about the stills that you have, and the way in which you're kind of using them then to create, because you create so many different brands, then there must be a really I mean, it must be a fearsome spreadsheet of production, which kind of generates all the.
I don't even know the number of brands we made. That's how
Yeah.
many. And that comes down to blending and things like that. And that's a discussion for another day. So, if you don't mind, Nick, I can share my screen here.
No, absolutely, please do.
Share that. And can everyone see it? I hope. I'll break down the chat here.
Yeah, you're good.
We can see.
Good.
Yeah.
All right. All right, so this is the little bit of the points I want to come across here. There's me, nice picture, 24 years in the business. I got a MSc and a PhD in brewing and distilling at Heriot-Watt. So there's my background. The other thing I want to highlight to this group, and if you could please share this after, Nick, that would be great. I have developed a Canadian whiskey flavor wheel. My friend Dave Broom calls this a distillery cheat sheet. So with the mindset of distillation, I just wanted to set ourselves up here that you can only distill as good as the flavors that you start with. If you have a shitty fermentation or you start with shitty grain, you're gonna get shitty distillate. So you got to do control the processes up front. This whiskey flavor wheel is a little bit of a different mindset than most. You can see the link. You can download it for free and print it out. I have no issues with that. Flavor only comes from 3 spots. It either comes from the yeast, the grain, or the wood. In the case of distillation, the yeast and the grain. And the second ring of the wheel are the things that I can control. So I can change the grains around to get different flavors. I can ferment. Fermentation is the heartbeat of what we do. It's the most important thing we do. And you can change the parameters for yeast to get green grass, fruity, floral, soapy, sulfury, sour notes. And I can do things with the wood. The third ring of the wheel is what you guys care about as bartenders. Those are the flavor descriptors. And I'm really geeking out here, Nick. The outside ring of the wheel is the chemical compound or the molecular compound. That
Everyone likes a good bit of ethyl caprolate.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, if you got ethyl caprolate, that's pineapple. It's a fruity note. It comes from yeast, right? I'm going to talk about rye here momentarily. So this connects and tells you the origin of your flavors. That's why Dave really liked this flavor wheel. It does describe where things come from.
And what's really interesting about that, if I may just very briefly interject, is that when we were putting together our systematic approach to tasting, which takes a similar, but it takes a very, very similar approach. And so, well, where do the flavors come from? So when you're describing things, it's like, well, is this raw material based fermentation or maturation based? It's actually, I mean, because I haven't seen this before, and it's actually really rather remarkable that we've almost ended up. I mean, you've got much more technical information on there, and understandably so. But we've ended up in very much the same place, and I really can't commend this enough in terms of an approach to kind of tasting, because it just helps you to think more clearly.
Yeah, and if Zan, I love to see Zan work on maybe one for rum, right? Rum would be yeast, wood, and molasses instead of grain. Right, so you get certain flavors, as you would know, those nice phenols that would come from molasses certainly would drive some flavor profiles or unique qualities to rum as well. So I think this should be a basis of most flavor wheels, to be honest with you. I have this trademarked in 170 countries, actually. So feel free to download it. Just to recap, corn gives you a sweet note. Barley gives you that nutty. That's very classic. You'll see in Irish whiskeys. Rye is Canadian whiskey. That's the spicy note. I'm going to talk about that in a minute here. And wheat is a nice bready note. So those are the things I can influence. Canadian whiskey, we tend to separate everything. We ferment them all separately, distill them separately, age them separately. And we put them together at the end. That's why they have a job like mine as a master blender. So I can draw in flavors at the end by putting certain percentages of rye, corn, or wheat, or barley to it, okay? Why rye? We've made more rye whiskey last year in Hiram Walker. We made over 3 million liters last year in the entire 160-year history. There is a reason. If you look at the grain rye, and you look in particular at the shell of the grain rye, that's fiber. Fiber is made of cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin. And you can see the structure, what it might look like. Those are big-ass molecules. Really, really big, big molecules. I envision sometimes like a brick wall. The cellulose and hemicellulose are the bricks, lignin is the glue. If you look at the little chart that I have in the bottom there and circled in red, rye, by far, in the shell of it, has a lot of lignin, has a lot of cement, okay? If you've been in our distillery, especially on a day like today, it's probably 40 degrees Celsius. We're constantly heating and cooking and distilling. When you're heating and cooking and distilling, what you're essentially doing is breaking apart this molecule of lignin. All right. So this is where I say to people, don't ask me how much rye is in my whiskey. You should be asking me how much 4-ethyl glycol is in my whiskey. It's very, very important. Rye has a lot of cement, rye has a lot of lignin, and it drives up these flavor molecules. Couple of things I want to explain here. The single malt distillers use lauter tons. They get rid of their husks. They don't go through the distillation process. So you eliminate some of these flavors. We don't. We have a whole grain mash where we are. The second thing I always like to address as well is you think about lignin and you think about peat. Well, what is peat? It's degraded plant material. That's for 1,000 years, right? So that's lignin. That's where your phenols come from in terms of when you're looking at single malt scotch. So lignin is very, very important molecule in terms of flavor profile. Yeast. I'll share this is more of a background information. This is where yeast gives you those fruity, floral, green grass, soapy. And I like I said, I'll share the slides with if you want. We can change the temperature or the nitrogen or oxygen levels, and you can make more or less ethyl caprolate. We talked about pineapple, and that's your esters, right? So if I decrease oxygen, yeast is going to produce more esters. If I increase the temperature of fermentation, they'll create more pineapple notes. So these are things, we are brewers first. That's why I always say fermentation is the most important part of what we do. Important to have good fermentation, important to have good grain. So this is our first distillation. Everything we do at the Hiram Walker Distillery, we'll run it through a beer still. This is a copper tube, basically. This one's 65 feet tall, and there are trays right below these windows here. And here's the section of tray here. So basically how it still operates is this. We take a whole grain mash, we feed it on from the 5th tray from the top, and it goes through these sieve trays. So they're just open circles. There might be 100 holes here. This is 6-foot diameter, and it's just gonna fall to the bottom. At the bottom, you add steam. Alcohol's boiling point is 78 degrees Celsius. Water's boiling point is 100. So you create this temperature gradient inside the still. So all the alcohol vapor is gonna go to the top. And it's going through these holes. All the water, dead yeast cells, and the grain will go out the bottom. Simply put is this. One pass through a column still. You keep the grain flavor you're using. You keep the fruity, floral, green grass, soapy notes the yeast has made. Those are all the characteristics that are coming from the yeast. You strip out the sulfur. I like showing this slide here. We use copper intentionally because it salts out, especially at the top of these stills. We'll salt out copper near the top. This is called copper sulfate. This is why there's windows inside of these stills. Every 3 or 4 months, we have to open them up and we just power wash the salt off the top of the tray. This is how bourbon is made. They will be, as Nick talked about, as a doubler. A lot of them will have a doubler. For us, we go to 70% alcohol. We have some reflux and deflagellators here that recycle some feeds back into the still. And we have them set so we will get the flavor profile and certainly enter. This is the top of the condenser at the top of the still as well. Doublers will just take you from 70 to 80% alcohol. So it increases your concentration if you want to do that. We don't have one on the still because we're trying to achieve the flavor. Okay. Next slide. We can barrel that rye whiskey and from that, or we can run it through, this is one of our extraction columns here. We can distill it twice through another column still. This is the extraction column. So what you do is take that 70% alcohol, you want to, and what extraction means is you got to change the boiling point. So we'll add water, we'll bring it down to about 15% alcohol, and then we'll feed it into the still, about partially up, it's below the floor level here. And feed it in. And this helps bring separation to a lot of those molecules, the fusel oils and your esters. So about 3/4 of the way up the still, the fusel oil will come off. We actually, our stills are still, we can't make it 200 feet tall. So we separate them out 100 feet. They are connected together continuously. And the esters will come out the top. And we distill to 94.5% alcohol. And we've been doing that. The earliest record I've seen it is probably about 1888. We've been double distilling. This makes light whiskey. I can make it from corn, wheat, rye, or barley, and you can't tell the difference. That's why it troubles me when I see Canadian whiskey producers out there. Some of them will have made from 100% rye whiskey on their label, but the question you should be asking is, how was it distilled? Did you single column distill it or double column distill? Because if you double column distilled it, you strip out the flavor of the rye. What's the point? Most Canadian whiskey wants, this is light base. This is what Canadians like to drink, lighter, smoother, base whiskey. Whatever region you are in Canada, you will use the cheapest grain possible to make your double distilled light base whiskey. For us, it's corn because we're Southern Ontario. Western Canada, they tend to use rye. Or we can pot distill. So here's some 3 types of pot stills we have at our facility. Everything, if I'll recap, goes through a column still first. So we got this, we call it White Dog in America. We call it High Wines in Canada. Very full flavor spirit, 70% alcohol. We can put it into one of these 3 pot stills. Pot stills are very simple pieces of equipment. You slowly boil it, and the thing with the lowest boiling point, or the lowest volatility, is going to come out the top of the still first, all right? Condense it and move it into a liquid. So this one is our workhorse here. All 3 are copper. This one is insulated because we do have workers around here. But I want you to focus in on what the line arm is here. The more the line arm points down, the heavier whiskey, because there's less reflux. So if we're trying to make bigger, bolder, spicier whiskeys, we want to choose a line arm. So this one will make our rye whiskey flavoring here. We do reflux a little bit back. You can see the pipe coming under the arm here, coming back in there to set this thing up. And we do run it for 12 hours, and we'll do a heads and tails cut. This one makes that big spicy whiskey. We know that, a heavier, bolder whiskey. This one gives an interesting fruity. It's got the nice ball shape here at the top of it here. Beautiful rye whiskey this one makes. This one's a little more lighter here. We got a few trays in here. We got a deflagrameter up here. We can recycle it back in if we want to. And this is more of our experimental still as well. So each bringing its own type of flavor, its own thing. But this is the slide that everybody really copies, takes a picture of, and I'm going to end it here. Pot distillation is very, very simple. And all I've done is taking it from a textbook. These aren't exactly the temperatures you would get on a still, but this is just for the sake of principle. These are the flavors that yeast are come from the grain here. All I've done is simply put it in the order of boiling points. The green grass notes comes first. That's your heads. We cut it here. Right? And then we keep boiling, Then your cherry notes come out, your banana, pear, strawberry, apple, apricot. Here's your roses, higher boiling points here. This is your 4-ethyl glycol. That's coming from the grain rye, right? And this is where you cut it. This is where we make a soap. So we can concentrate up these here and our hearts cut in any of those 3 pot stills. That's why I say, don't ask me how much rye is in my whiskey. Ask me how much 4-ethyl glycol in the whiskey. And we do know there's boiling point. And I'll add one more, Nick. Here's my free advice to anyone who's a distiller in the audience. This is my free, you'll pay a guy $10,000. I'm giving it to you for free. When you first start a pot still, you got to run it slowly, run it for about 12 hours. And what I would tell you to do is take samples every 15 or 20 minutes. So after the 12-hour mark, you're going to have 30, 40 different samples. But what you're going to see is the heads are going to smell like this. You're going to smell these as you go along. Line up all 40 samples, and then this is how you make your cut. You might want your, oh, you know what? I don't like sample 1 through 5, but I like 6. But I don't like sample 30 through 40. So I'm going to pick 6 through 30. That's my heart cut. The very first time you run a pot still, that's your sacrificial run to get to run your still.
And I would, Don, if you could just keep on that last slide, because just wanted to make one couple of points with that last slide as well, if I may. But I can't stress that it's one of the most educational things you can do, and it's probably one of the best things I've ever done. Is when you go to a distillery, and if you've got a friendly distiller you can go to who's running a batch, is just like sit and it will take a while. It will take hours, but you just sit there with tasting glasses and nosing glasses, and you just go through the run. And it is one of the most illuminating things as how things will change. And suddenly these changes can be dramatic.
Yeah, within a matter of minutes, it'll happen. Yeah. All of a sudden, it just, and I'm not saying you're going to get these things discreetly. That doesn't happen. They do come out together. That's why I say run it slowly. Absolutely. Run it slowly, but there's a point of diminishing returns too. You can run it too slow, and then you're not going to get right. So that's where the distillers, that's what master distillers will do and work on. And they work with blenders like me, because I know what people want in taste and profile. I don't like soapiness in my whiskey, so I have no issues taking a longer tails cut. There's a lot of single malt scotches out there is very soapy, and Zan might talk about I know there's estery types of rums that are made out there. They intentionally want these things here. So depending what style you want to make, and this is what distillers do all day long is this type of thing, and understand where flavors come. And
I know there are fruit. I mean, fruit distillation is one of the hardest things to get right. And I will know that I know that there are many of the very best fruit distillers who are distilling in batches, and they know, broadly speaking, where the heart to tails cut's going to come, and they won't make that decision during the run because it's too intensely stressful. So they'll just take a very small kind of collection pots, and I'll have a lot of them, and they'll just go through, and they'll go, well, by the point where I've finished collecting here, I know that I'm into tails, so that's fine. And then they will go back through those collection pots and go, right, that's what I'm coming in, that's what's coming out. And for those seasonal products, that's I mean, intensely important. And if you want, particularly with fruit spirits, where you can,
fruit spirits, you got to watch because stone fruits, stone fruits are notorious with methanol. That's coming out. Yeah, that's the stuff that comes with you got to be very careful with that. Yes. And you got to be very careful. That's where you go blind, right? So that's where it's very interesting now. And also that graph, and I can't. It's incredible actually how Don and I seem to have ended up on the same kind of world. But that graph is or a version of that graph, which is kind of, you can see in a lot of distilling textbooks. It's something that we include in our level 3, and it's the best way of understanding what's really going on in a pot still. You get these kind of peaks of the various different kind of fractions based on their volatility, and where you can see there that he kind of like, well, here are my cut points. Well, if I shuffle them out this way, I'm including more stuff. If I shuffle them in this way, I'm including less stuff. And that's really, it's such an easy visual way of understanding it is
what's happening in a still.
I'll go back to that original flavor wheel I showed. A lot of people asking, why didn't you include distilling on that? A piece of metal doesn't make flavor. A piece of metal shapes it. Distilling will shape your whiskey. And I know that's a pun on words, but it does shape the flavor of what you want.
And that really is a very important point. It's just it's this is the thing that kind of gives you, it's the concentration, it's the selection, and it's the selecting bit, which is the key bit in distillation. That was brilliant, Don. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Now, Mr. Zan.
Nick, before we move on to Zan, there's one question, Don, I wanted to ask you. For all of these different stills that you have, sorry, this is Rob from WSET here, by the way. Do you have different teams running each still, or does everyone know how to run every still?
We do have a master distiller. She's run the still. I work very closely with her, Amy, and so it's one person. But then we have a unionized environment. We train them how to run it after that. So it's up to me and her to make the settings we want. And I know I saw a thing on Twitter the other day saying, well, is there such a thing as a master distiller anymore because they're all automated? Oh, absolutely. Somebody does that, has to do the programming, and that's us, right? we do look at the dials, we look at the temperature, we look at the pressure. So absolutely, one person's in charge, and we want to dial up the flavors, what people are looking for. Great question, Rob.
Just another question here from Anna. Is there, Don, this is for Don, is there a legal specification for Canadian whiskey in column distillation for a minimum or maximum number of rectification plates?
No, the only thing is you have to keep it under 95.0.
Okay.
So,
and then another question here is, are you or is anyone else experimenting with just taking specific different cuts and then blending those cuts?
We got many things in our inventories with different cuts, and I'll do it post aging, right? So I got lots of aging things, and so if I want to dial up that soapy note, sometimes I don't want to usually, but if I want to get some of that characteristic, or if I want a buttery note, I know that's in the heads. So I mean, you can work on it different ways. So yes, we do take different cuts.
So you'll make a skinnier cut and then age it and then go mess around afterwards.
Yeah, that's what we do.
Cool.
And if you're working with a lot of brands, and if you want the flexibility to create new brands, having that diversity in your warehouse stock is the thing that allows you to do that. If it's all very much the same,
it gets boring.
Well, A, it won't be the same, and B, it will all be, but it will just be similar enough, and you just don't have the flexibility. The more variation you have, the easier it is to be consistent, but also be inventive.
And I encourage everyone to follow me out there at CDN Whiskey Doc. I'm on Instagram and Twitter. And I do a blending 101 where I line up 140 different samples, and you can come for $100. You can come and blend your own whiskey. It takes about 2 hours to do, but it's exciting. I sell out just like that. And if anyone's interested in doing a blending 101 with Dr. Don, It's a lot of fun, all the different permutations you can put together.
Good stuff. Thank you very much, Don. Right, Zan, in a Starbucks by the beach. Not that we're all jealous.
Hey, what's going on? I know, I feel like I should have went before Don, because I'm trying to process all that information. So thank you, Don, for that, man. That was incredible. But we'll jump right into, kind of what we're doing at Worthy Park, which is, much different, but a lot of the theory in terms of what Don was talking about in terms of, the pot still, the reflux, what we're looking for, and the way we make our cuts is, he primed you all up very well. Now, before we kind of go into, what we do from the still side, in rum making, there is so many other inputs that go into it, whether you're talking about like the molasses, the yeast that we're using, the water that we're using. And one of the very unique things about Worthy Park is that we're a single estate producer. So we have nearly 4,000 acres of cane field. So we're growing cane at the estate. We're also a sugar and molasses producer, and we're the only producer in Jamaica that uses its own produced molasses for distillation. So it's very unique in that we're very unique in that regards as well. And then our third component is obviously our distillery, which is only about 4 acres, but we cut it right out of the cane fields and started distilling again in 2005. And I say all that to say, we in rum, we like to often the basis of comparison between rum producers is, is it pot still or is it column still? And I think Nick alluded to it earlier. That is only a fraction of the story in rum making. And, you talk about your inputs with the molasses, cane juice, or even the yeast that you're using. So it's everything on a whole that kind of goes into the flavors of your rum that you're looking for. But for all intents and purposes, today we're talking about just the still. Now, for those of you that are, and again, I apologize for all of you who are very advanced in your knowledge. I'm keeping it at a very base level in this diagram where, when you're looking at how rum is made, you're taking your raw materials, molasses in our case, you're fermenting. At Worthy Park, it's anywhere between 30 hours up to 2 to 3 weeks. And then we're distilling. Only in a pot. We only have one pot still, double retort. And then obviously we're doing all of our aging and blending at the estate as well. So all of that done at Worthy Park, but any little change in any of those variables is going to give you, completely different styles of rum. Now, Jamaican rum specifically, we talk a lot about esters, and Jamaican rum is historically known for having a heavier body, a higher ester rum. And for us in Jamaica, we like that as a profile, and through our distillation, we try to keep, the fat, heavy rum. Now, some of our friends in other islands, like our friends in Puerto Rico, for example, they're going for a much lighter style of rum, and they're not looking to keep as many of those esters through distillation as we are. Now, again, as Don said, a lot of this begins in fermentation, and at Worthy Park, we track about, in our regular GC testing, what we're looking at on a daily basis, we're looking at about 16 different congeners, which we're measuring on a daily basis in our rums. Now,
Sorry, Zan, can I just quickly jump in there? Just in case people know carboxylic acids by another name, sometimes they're referred to as fatty acids as well.
Yes,
sorry. And the other thing is that when you're looking at, when you look at ethyl acetate, which is a very, very common ester, that's ethanol and acetic acid. Acetic acid is not nice, that's vinegar. Butyric acid is horrible smelling. And yet ethyl butyrate will give you this wonderful pineapple-y kind of flavor. It is very odd what happens to the aromas of these things as the alcohol and the fatty acid carboxylate merge, that you end up with these quite stunning flavors. So the more of, as I think Sam's going to say, the more of that you can drive in, the more flavor you get.
The better. Thanks, Nick. I think the only other thing I kind of wanted to touch on before I went into distillation is we do, there's a lot of talk about dunder usage and muck pits in Jamaican rum specifically. By definition wise, in Jamaica, we refer to dunder as what's left over after distillation. We use that as fertilizer in our cane field. So we cool that down and we use it for fertigation. Now, when you're talking about muck pits, for example, Hamden, which is, our friends out in Trelawney, they keep that dunder and they use it in the addition of muck pits. Their muck pits, so it's under the fermentation house, and it's a giant, essentially pit of bacteria, which is like a soup of carboxylic acid, which Nick is referring to. And it's usually made up of molasses, the stillage or the dunder, cane vinegar, acetic acid, and the muck that was in there previously. And what they're using that for is almost to supercharge the ester production process. So they're using it to help create more of those esters in their distillation. At Worthy Park, we don't do that. Now, what we do to get our high ester rum is the yeast that we're using, we propagate it in one of our 4 yeast propagation tanks. So in there, we add molasses, cane juice, and crushed cane stalks. And the bacteria that develops in there, we're using that for our high ester rum production. So just to kind of, give you that point of differentiation. Now, the double retort pot stills. Now, there is a lot of talk. Actually, fellow Jamaican Canadian Mike Delavante, who's a good friend of mine, he believes that the double retort pot stills that we're using in Jamaica were based somewhat off of a Frenchman, Edward Adams pot still, circa 1801. I won't go into the history of it, but I'm sure Nick and WSET courses could deep dive into that for you. But just to kind of give you a basis of where we're coming from, the belief is that our double retort pot stills are based on that. Now, welcome to Worthy Park. This is our double retort pot still. It's made by Forsyth out in Scotland, who I think a lot of you are familiar with. When we decided to rebuild our distillery and put a still in 2004, we kind of looked at the market, kind of took a temperature for what people were looking for, not only in Jamaica, but worldwide. And there was a lot of column still rum in Jamaica. There's a lot of multi-column still rum coming out of the island. But what there wasn't was a lot of solely double retort pot still distillation. And this is, as I was alluding to, the traditional way of making rum in Jamaica. And we wanted to kind of, bring that back in a way, or kind of focus on that, I should say, as our primary means of production. Our pot still is fully automated, and we're one of the only fully automated double retort pot stills out there. We're the only one in Jamaica that's fully automated. And like Don said, yes, even though our team is much smaller than you would see at distilleries that it's not fully automated, we still have a master blender and we still have a team of people that works on it, because the operation of a pot still is only as good as the variables and the settings that you're putting on it. So this is our pot still. It's a 4 to 5 hour cycle, and kind of what happens after fermentation, we're getting about 8 to 9% alcohol. In our higher ester rums, it's about 5 to 6%, and it's heated, and the alcohols that are evaporating and condensing before the water goes into our low wine retort, and your alcohol in there is about 30%. And there is liquid in there from the previous batches that was run. So the vapors actually go down into, so actually kind of like this. So if you think of my straw in my cup, the vapors go into the liquid that's there, and it's bubbling through. And then the same process of evaporation and condensation happens out of that pot and goes into our high wine retort, where now it's about 60% ABV. And the same process happens where it's heated from the vapors coming off the previous pot, and it evaporates and condenses. And we're doing our rum cuts at about 85 to 87%. So higher than what Don was referring to in his cuts. I think he said 70 or so, but much lower than you would get if we were using a 2, 3, or 5 multi-column still. Now, if you look on top of I don't know if you can see my mouse, but if you look on top of our high wine retort, you see a little rectifying column there. So we put that in after we installed our pot still in 2005, because we wanted to get a much lower ester count of rum. The bloody thing didn't work, so it was a 20,000 quid decoration accessory that we have on our pot still. Now this year, earlier on this year, we actually modified the arm coming off of it. So the arm now is no longer straight across, but it's like the other arms where it's going up and down, and it works now. So we are able to use that to get a much lighter cut of mark of rum. And if we wanted to continue to do our heavy fat distillation, we just open up the plates and it goes straight through. So that's our pot still kind of in a nutshell. And now what we're doing, you know, after our batch, after our run, we have we collect back our high wines and we put them back into the high wine retort, and that's going to be from about 75% ABV to about 85% is our high wine. Now our low wine is from about 60% up into 70-75, and we're putting that back in our low wine retort. Now, both of those are relatively common across all the distilleries, but we take it a step further, and you know, we're capturing back our extra low wines. So we're from about 30 to 60%. We capture back our extra low wines, and we'll use them in our first pot there to start. So same but different, I guess, is the best way to describe it, through across all the Jamaican distilleries who have a double retort pot still. But obviously the variables, the cuts are going to be different. The design of the arms, the size of the tanks, everything is going to be very unique to the distillery. But in theory, it's kind of the same way that we distill.
Zan, if I can just, sorry, very quickly jump in, just for, because sometimes people can get a bit confused with what high wines and low wines are. If you imagine the heads will come off, then the heart will come off. The high wines is the first bit of what would otherwise have been the tails, and the low wines is the next bit, and then anything else is. So basically what they're doing is they're taking what would have been tails and putting them back into these retorts. And the brilliance of this double retort system is that one distillation, you get a usable spirit. So you're kind of doing a triple distillation by kind of using your tails, which helps you to recycle more of those kind of flavor generating compounds as well.
Yeah, totally. Thank you for that, Nick.
No, it's fine. Sorry.
I just wanted to show you guys a little bit on a little more detail on our still, just because I like pictures, and I'm sure there's other people that like to see it a little more in depth as well. So this is where you can see right on the bottom here. So we don't have coils inside, and we don't do direct heat for our pot still. So what we have an external steam calandria. So the liquid, the wash is running through here, and it gets heated up kind of in our calandria here, and it's recirculated. So that's the process of how we heat up our pot still, which is different than some of the older styles, which have, you know, direct heat on the bottom of them. Just a little kind of closer look on our arms there, and you know, I think Don again talked a little bit about it before, but you know, you can see our line arms are, you know, they go straight up, but then they go down because we're trying to keep a lot of those heavier compounds and those volatile compounds in through distillation. Just a couple different views of it. Again, our rectifier, we've changed that now, so the arm is a little different, and it's currently it is working for us now. And our low wine, and our high wine retort, and there's about a 10% difference in size between the two. And yeah, that kind of in a nutshell is, you know, what we're doing at Worthy Park in terms of distillation. Now, I think, you know, what we're doing and what our focus is in rum making, and even though it is one still, you know, we do about 6 different marks of rum, unaged marks of rum, and with the different ester compounds. And sometimes we'll sell those as straight marks. Sometimes we'll blend those together to create different marks. But you know, there is a pretty big variation in what's coming off of our still, even though yes, it is one still. Yes, we are molasses based, but the various types of marks that we're making does give us quite a bit of flexibility in what we're doing blend wise. Now, the good thing is our rum is in Canada now. Shameless plug. We do have Worthy Park and Rum Bar available. And coincidentally, John Smolinski is the man who you can hit up, and he'll tell you how to get it. But for point being, as an example, you know, our Rum Bar White Overproof, which is our unaged 63% rum, is a blend of our lighter and heavier marks. So even though it's one still, not everything coming off of it is the same. And we're blending those together either to make unaged, to bottle unaged products or for further aging as well. So, yeah, John, I don't know if you want to just to kind of add how we're getting along with the rum again.
Sure. I mean, the whole way the Canadian liquor works is a different seminar. The only place you can buy retail right now, Worthy Park in Canada, because Canada is Metro Liquor in Regina, Saskatchewan.
Big up Regina.
Yeah, nothing like Regina. Yeah, I was joking with Zan. I'm like, we have to channel our inner Canadian, and if the Grey Cup actually happens this year, it's in Regina, so we got to go over there. Yeah. But yeah, it's starting to bleed its way through the veins of the supply network in Canada. So you can hit us up, and it doesn't matter where you are from coast to coast. We'll be able to get it to you. It'll just take a little bit of time. But yeah, super excited to have Worthy Park in Canada. That's for sure.
And I think sorry, Nick. I just kind of literally nick the surface of what we're doing in terms of distillation. When you look at the amount of analysis, I'm an idiot in terms of chemistry. I'll fully disclose that, and I wish that I did study more. When I was in high school, university, but we do a tremendous amount of work after the fact and during the process in our lab. So it is still a very technical procedure. We like to kind of romanticize rum making, where it's the magic of distillation, but there's a ton of analysis that goes into it. There's a ton of chemical analysis. There's a ton of kind of that geeky, nerdy work, which we all appreciate and love now, that digs much deeper than kind of the overall outset of just making rum in a pot still. But a lot of that is more Nicholas's and WSET's kind of wheelhouse in terms of explaining that to everybody how it works.
And I think the most important thing to kind of look at it is like even with one still, and they just have one still. And I mean, I don't know how long you're going to last with just one still, because you're growing still, so you might have to kind of put a clone in at some juncture. But even with one still, it can actually generate quite a lot of variety. And as Don was saying, and as Zan has just said, just by the reality of how they operate, you need that variation. So a lot of that variation in Jamaican rum production is being driven by fermentation. Yeah. So they have the one still, and Zan is very generous with his marks. So I did a BCB in Berlin last year. We did a presentation about the different marks that you can, then we tasted the individual marks that Worthy Park generated. Yeah. And they do create a lot of different. There is a big difference between the very high ester one and the lighter styles. And that power is being generated in the fermentation, and the selection this is just a tool that's going to allow you to kind of get the kind of that variety that you need. So it's an incredibly flexible piece of equipment, even just with the one still. But yeah, on much smaller scale than anything that kind of that Don is dealing with. So, but great.
Yeah, I think if we ran it full, 365, we could probably do maybe 2 million LAs a year. And we're just over, we do maybe around 50-60% of that, depending on the year. So we have a lot of room to grow, and that's where John and it has guaranteed me that we'll have to put a pot still in within another 4 to 5 years.
Yeah, which is very exciting. That you've managed to achieve that growth in a relatively short space of time. Okay, so
before you go on, Nick, Zan, can I ask you a question, please? So you talked about the high wines and low wines going back into the retorts, and as Nick explained, that's basically splitting the towels into various parts. Yeah. So the towels obviously contain quite a lot of fusel alcohols and those kind of. How do you deal with that build-up? At a certain point, do you have to empty those retorts so that you don't get too much of a build-up of those fusel alcohols, or does it just constantly run in perpetuity?
No, we actually do. We actually do empty and clean out our pot still. We're not at a point where, we're running full time. So we do have throughout the year spread out some downtime, but yeah, we do empty them out and, essentially start from scratch. I think Don kind of said, when you're starting up your pot still, you're taking your, you can line up and do multiple different samples throughout that. And, there's many times during the year where we're kind of running a first distillation again, just so we can start the build up for the next runs.
Awesome. And Don, for Hiram Walker, with your heads and tails, do you recycle? Do you discard? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, we don't recycle. I don't want a soapy note into our rye whiskeys. I want to dial up the spiciness, and we have the luxury because we have rectification stills where we are. So we take the heads and the tails and we put it into our rectification column. So eventually we actually get concentrated fusel oils, which we sell to a perfume company. It's very oily. And then the heads, eventually what we do is actually send it back to our powerhouse and we use it as a fuel to make steam.
Very cool. Thank you, guys.
And that's something which, I mean, that's not in those big distilleries, that's not an uncommon thing. I know that if a similar Pernod Ricard facility in Ireland, Middleton, where they have their pot still stuff and they have a whole load of different heads and tails that build up during the course of they're making the different kind of whiskies that they're doing, and they get this big build up of heads and tails, and they'll run it through a column, and then it will just be, it can then, they can recycle that or they can use that in another way. So it's quite a common.
Yeah, I just want to add one point to Zan, and I never said it during mine, and I think it's just a matter of interest. So he talked about dunder or building up these carboxylic acids. So they're various acids. I mean, they're long chain molecules. What we as distillers do is we take advantage of what they call as a Fischer reaction. When you boil an acid with high strength ethanol, where ethanol is in high concentration, it makes the corresponding ester. So if you got acetic acid, it'll make ethyl acetate. If you got butyric acid, it makes ethyl butyrate. If you've got capric acid, ethyl caprate. So that's a clever way what they've done in Jamaica or other rum producers to make these esters. It's called a Fischer reaction, and it's a clever way of making these fruity flavors.
And they're taking place in the still, aren't they, John?
Yeah.
And the way that thanks, Son, that's awesome. And the way that we're doing that kind of technique was codified, I guess you could say, in the early 1900s by H.H. Cousins, who was the Jamaican government chemist. And he kind of put this procedure in place, and it's something that is very specific to the Trelawney distilleries. For whatever reason, on that side of the island, they were very taken with it, I guess. And it's still to this day something that's practiced out there, which is really cool.
I've seen some of the Chinese alcohol do the same things, but with grain. It's very interesting how they. Yeah. I don't know the term they use it for in there. I don't, obviously not dunder, but they do have dunder pits.
Yeah.
They've got these carboxylic acids, and then they sell Chinese alcohol based on the ester content from these dunder pits. Kind of cool. It's interesting. Awesome. Take advantage.
Has it my last point? Has anybody heard of our Jamaican? Well, we in Jamaica, and I think there's a couple of Jamaicans on here, refer to it as John Crow Batty, and actually Adrian knows it. So John Crow Batty, a John Crow in Jamaica is a vulture. And as the story, the legend goes, is a lot of the distillery workers would steal the tails, the unwanted, the discarded alcohol from the distillery, and they would smuggle it out of the distillery, and that they would drink it in the countryside of Jamaica, and that became known, as legend has it, as John Crobati. And or in Jamaica we call it kulo kulo, as like the stolen rum from the distilleries. And it's still to this day drank in some of these areas and sold under the counter. And there's lots of stories about the blindness and the loss of teeth and other stuff that has happened from years of drinking John Crobati and kulo kulo out in the countryside. So that's I
would not recommend drinking that on a regular basis.
Yeah, but that's Jamaican moonshine for you.
Excellent. Well, thank you both very, very much for that. I mean, that's certainly a lot of that's been very interesting for me, and it's kind of, and I think it's offered as a very interesting kind of comparison between two quite different approaches to distillation. But still generating variation, still using the tool of the still to kind of create exactly what it is they want. They have a clear view of what it is where they're trying to get to, and these are the tools which allow them to do that. So that's all very cool. Now, Rob, you were monitoring the questions. Was there anything else that's kind of popped up?
I think everything we've asked the ones that were pertinent, and we've answered some of the other ones in the chat. So I think we're in good shape right now.
Okay. So I think we're kind of at time, and I don't know kind of if anyone else has anything else they particularly want to kind of throw in at this juncture. I don't know if John or Matt wanted to do more of a general wrapping up, but thank you all from my perspective. Thank you all for tuning in. I hope this has been not too wildly geeky, and trust me, lignin is a very interesting chemical.
Well, yeah, I often say lignin's the world's most unappreciated molecule, to be honest with you. A lot of your flavors from whiskey comes in from lignin. It comes from either the peat, comes from rye, or it comes in
and it can come from the wood as well. When you char the wood, a lot of the exciting flavors you get in wood maturation is to do with lignin, particularly lignin breakdown. Cellulose and hemicellulose are very, very robust molecules because they're bonded very tight, cellulose in particular. But lignin is very breakable with heat. And because it's a bit of a jumble, it generates all sorts of interesting things.
Each plant material has its own DNA of lignin too, right? So that's why exactly. They even suggest that peat from different locations in Scotland will taste different because it's probably coming from different plants.
Yeah, well, right? No, absolutely. Yeah. Right. And that would be specified in Scotland. You'd specify both parts per million and kind of where is the peat being sourced from.
Yeah, and it's one of the things, I don't know if Zan sees it with the molasses sources, but certainly with rye, we're actually going down the road of getting very specific varieties of rye that has even more spicy than just your normal grade 2. And you're looking for those high chlorethylglycols if you can, right?
Yeah, our what's interesting about Worthy Park is because we're first and foremost right now we're still a sugar producer, and we're that's a whole other conference for next year. But
yeah, it is. I know we're going in the side here.
But yeah, we're we get our molasses. We only use our molasses, and from a distiller's perspective, it's probably not the molasses you want to work with because because we are a good sugar producer. So it does have less sugar content, but because on the flip side, we're a new distillery and we have a more efficient and automated still, we're okay working with it. But I'm sure most of the other Jamaican distilleries that have to mess with our molasses probably don't like using it. Well, yeah, Don, we'll do that next year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. Matt or John, did you want to kind of say any kind of final words of wisdom?
Yeah, I mean, speaking of just having you guys back next year, we like to extend the invite to you to come to Halifax if your schedule does permit. Typically, we run the festival the first week in June. Nick King, that includes you as well.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Thank you.
WSET.
Yeah, Matt, if I could just say one thing if we're wrapping it up. If anyone wants to taste double distilled light whiskey, the Weiser's 18 year. That's straight corn whiskey that's been double distilled. It's light whiskey. That's what it would be like off our still. And the other one I'll pony up. If you want to taste the spiciest, biggest, boldest rye whiskey, Lot 40. That goes through our column and pod still. So if you want to see the differences and when the flavor's coming off the still, those are two totally polar opposite whiskeys.
And Zan, do you want to give an example of kind of like two of the expressions now that they're available in Canada, two of the things people could look out for and kind of their characteristics?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think you definitely look out for, I don't have the bottle on me, but Rum Bar, White Overproof Rum. That's our baby. That's our flagship. And, we are having our Worthy Park Single Estate Reserve, which is our flagship on the age range. So it's really cool too, because you can see that, from our unaged white rum, as we age in the different styles of rum that we can get just from one still. So it is quite a big contrast in profile and flavors as well, which is quite exciting. So I'll see you guys in Halifax next year.
Yep, I'll see you guys too.
Yeah, I think we could do definitely a second, third, fourth. The chemistry between the two of you is unbelievable. So really appreciate you both being on here. I think it's been fantastic. And Nick, thanks for keeping us on time and being a wonderful.
No, my pleasure. This has been a great conversation.
Awesome. So this is in closing, this is our last festival seminar for Drink Atlantic, our 8th of 8, and we really appreciate those that have taken the time to be here. I have a special thank you to John Smolensky, Stefan Dubell, Jeffrey Van Horn, Evan McNeil, Christina Vieira, and Ezra Edelstein. Without you guys, this would not have happened. And we're starting to understand the importance of team. Last year, John came up in year 2 and he said, you really should put a team together. It shouldn't be just 2 of you trying to run this festival. And he couldn't have been more correct. So it seems pretty elementary, but John, thank you so much for all of your help and support, and the whole Drink Atlantic team for putting this together. I think it's been a tremendous success. We came into this, we didn't know there's a lot of ambiguity on how this would work out, but because of all the support that you guys have shown and all you panelists, moderators, WSET, CTVA, NSLC, fantastic work. Thank you so much. And next year, like I said, we'll be back on the ground, fingers crossed. Nick, I think there's a direct to Halifax when things are normal. So can't wait to have you all here next year.
Excellent. Looking forward to it.
Looking forward to it.
Thanks so much.
All right.
Check us out on
Thank
YouTube.
you.
If you want to see this seminar again, and all of our other seminars will be available, some longer than others. So YouTube, the Drink Atlantic YouTube channel, and that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, everybody.